The air at Brussels airport was sharp and cold in the morning. Through the dim boarding lounge, a lone African man moved quietly, almost unseen. A faded gray coat, worn sneakers, a canvas backpack hanging off one shoulder. Nobody looked twice. Security officers walked by. Businessmen nearby laughed loudly over new mining deals in Africa. None of them knew the man by the window, reading calmly from his phone, was no ordinary traveler. He was Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso, returning home from a summit that could change the fate of a continent. Across the lounge, frustration boiled. A powerful French CEO, late for boarding, erupted in anger. He demanded by force a seat in business class. Airline staff scrambled, and when a senior flight attendant boarded the plane, scanning the cabin for someone to sacrifice, her eyes locked onto one man, the man in 2A. The man she decided didn't belong. What happened next shocked the world, sparked a global scandal, and remind the world, true power needs no throne, and true dignity speaks loudest when no words are shouted. This is the shocking story of what happened on President Ibrahim Traoré on seat 2A in Horizon France Air. Welcome to the world of research. Welcome to the large family of wisdom in narrations. The Brussels airport boarding lounge was sharp with cold air and still dim before dawn. Amid the soft rumble of rolling suitcases, a lone African man walked slowly into the boarding area. He wore a faded gray coat and well-worn sneakers, and a plain canvas backpack hung from one shoulder. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't look around. No one was with him, and no one paid him any attention. Just another solitary African passenger moving through the world, in the kind of invisibility it often casts on men like him. He picked a seat by the window and sat down gently. From his pocket, he took out his phone, opened his email, and began reading, patiently, calmly, in complete silence. Security officers walked by. None stopped. A group of businessmen in suits laughed loudly a few rows away, bragging about a money-making new mining project in Central Africa. Not one of them glanced at the quiet man by the window. Nothing about him seemed important. What they didn't know was that his name was Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso, returning from a summit in Brussels on gold mining rights and Africa's economic future. This flight was the final leg of the journey home for a leader without a crown, without an entourage. Ibrahim believed that true power didn't need to be paraded. It only needed to be placed in the hands of someone who knew how to hold it in silence. The boarding gate opened and passengers started lining up. The usual announcements played, same old, nothing special, until an angry shout broke the calm. A man rushed into the priority lane at the last second. He was moving fast, his face bright red with frustration, waving a first-class ticket in the air. This was Gaspard Leroy, 55, a French CEO whose energy company works in more than a dozen African countries. He cut an imposing figure, a tailored navy blue suit, a deep red silk tie, and silver-framed glasses balanced on a sharp nose. Leroy had arrived late, and when a gate agent informed him that business class was completely full, he stopped in his tracks as if he couldn't comprehend the words.
"I'm a strategic partner of Burkina Faso,"
he barked, voice echoing across the lounge.
"You want me to sit in economy?" "Who made that ridiculous decision?"
Leroy demanded, hitting his hand on the counter. The staff exchanged panicked looks. Within minutes, he was on the phone with airline executives and threatening legal action, as if it were routine. The ground crew rushed around. Finally, a supervisor spoke softly into his radio. "Call the head flight attendant. Ask her to handle it quietly." A few minutes later, a woman in a neat uniform stepped out of the jet bridge. She drew everyone's attention the moment she appeared, not through rank, but through her attitude alone. It was Brigitte Lemaitre, the senior flight attendant on this Horizon France Air flight. 48 and every bit the seasoned crew leader, Brigitte was a broad-shouldered white woman with a no-nonsense air. Her navy blue uniform was spotless, a silk scarf knotted neatly at her neck. Her face was heavy with makeup, and her lips were painted a bold red. She moved with purpose, each step landing firmly on the floor. As if that bold red lipstick alone claimed ownership of the space around her, Brigitte kept her chin raised and her blonde hair back in a tight knot. She had been told a VIP needed a seat in business class, but Brigitte didn't bother to ask who the VIP was, nor did she check the passenger list for who might be moved. She marched straight onto the plane and into the business class cabin, eyes already scanning for a suitable sacrifice. Her eyes landed on row 2. There, in seat 2A by the window, sat the quiet man in the grey coat she'd noticed earlier. Ibrahim Traoré was calmly reading on his phone, completely unaware he had just become her target. Brigitte didn't need any more information. She didn't care that his boarding pass showed he was a priority passenger. In her eyes, she saw only one thing. That man doesn't look like he belongs in business class. Brigitte stepped into the walkway in front of Ibrahim and gave him a tight, professional smile. She didn't bother with introductions. In a sweetly firm tone, she said,
"Sir, due to a scheduling issue, we need to rearrange some seating. Would you mind moving to the economy cabin for the flight?"
Seated, Ibrahim slowly looked up at the flight attendant. His face remained calm, steady, and unsurprised. Without a word, he reached inside his coat and pulled out his boarding ticket. Gently, he held it up for her to see. Business class, seat 2A, clearly marked as a high-priority booking. Brigitte glanced at the ticket for just a second, then looked back at him. Her polite smile evaporated. In that brief glance, her expression said, "How could someone like you have this seat?" She pushed the boarding pass back into his hand and gave a quick nod. No sorry, no sign of politeness. Without another word, Brigitte turned around and walked back up the row. She tried to stay professional, but her narrowed eyes and tight jaw showed clear dislike.
"People like that always make things harder,"
she said under her breath as she walked away, low enough not to be recorded but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. By now, her frustration had hardened into resolve. If that man in 2A wouldn't move, someone else would. She scanned the business class cabin for other possibilities. Her eyes landed on a few dark-skinned passengers sitting alone. Yes, them. Methodically, Brigitte leaned down to 2 different African passengers and quietly informed each that they needed to change seats to accommodate a VIP. A young businessman in row 4 hesitated in confusion, but her hard stare and unclear promise of compensation made him reluctantly gather his things. Within minutes, 2 paying passengers had been pressured out of their business class seats, without a hint of regret on Brigitte's part. One spacious seat was now free for Monsieur Leroy. Yet for Brigitte, even that wasn't enough. Her blood was still boiling from the audacity of the man in 2A. In her mind, he had made her job difficult by refusing to simply comply. She couldn't let that kind of disrespect slide. Brigitte planted herself once more in front of Ibrahim's seat. This time she didn't bother to pretend. She simply stood there, arms crossed tightly over her chest, expecting him to know his place and leave on his own. But Ibrahim did not cower. Instead, he slowly rose to his feet. He wasn't rude or aggressive. He moved with an easy, disarming calm and turned to face her. He did not raise his voice or show a hint of anger. He simply looked at her, eyes level and steady, as if seeing right through the uniform and tough act. He held that gaze for a long moment. The surrounding cabin fell into a stunned hush. Then Ibrahim spoke, his voice soft but clear, each word cutting through the air.
"To judge someone by their skin,"
he said,
"is to proudly declare your own ignorance."
The words struck Brigitte like a blow. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. A chill coursed up her spine, though the cabin air hadn't changed. There were no words in her mind, no company policy, no practiced smile to shield her now. Brigitte turned and walked away down the walkway, face burning beneath her makeup. Not because she understood she was wrong, but because she had no response. Ibrahim quietly sat back down. Almost immediately, Gaspard Leroy appeared in the walkway. The crew had set up a comfortable seat for him and even handed him a glass of champagne as he sat down. Brigitte forced a bright smile while guiding him to his spot. After 6 hours and 20 minutes, the plane started to land. Outside the window, Burkina Faso appeared in the bright red light of dawn. Red soil, dry forests, wavy tin roofs shining in the sun, and a long line of black SUVs parked on the runway. Leroy saw the motorcade and smiled, straightening his tie.
Looks like they're here for me,
he said quietly. Brigitte gave him a polite smile, though something about those uniformed figures gathering outside felt off. The plane's wheels touched down in Ouagadougou, and before it even reached the gate, a unit of black uniformed officers marched onto the runway. Whispers spread through the cabin. A senior officer in full uniform hurried up the mobile stairs and onto the plane. Without slowing, he walked quickly down the walkway to seat 2A, stopped, and stood at attention, giving a sharp salute. His voice boomed, breaking the silence. "Mr. President, welcome home." For a moment, the cabin was silent. Then a few people gasped. A wine glass fell from a passenger's hand and smashed on the floor. Brigitte stood frozen, the passenger list sliding from her fingers. Gaspard Leroy sat up so fast he almost spilled his champagne. He jumped not because someone had called for him, but because they hadn't. That title, Mr. President, was not meant for him at all. Leroy's face lost all its color. President, he said, his voice shaking, eyes now fixed on the quiet man in the gray coat, the very passenger he and Brigitte had ignored the whole flight. In the middle of the uproar, Ibrahim Traoré stayed calm. He stood up slowly, fastening the top button of his plain coat. There was no anger on his face, no hint of arrogance, just quiet authority. He returned the officer's salute with a polite nod. In that moment, everyone in the cabin realized what had happened and felt a wave of embarrassment. One by one, every other passenger in business class lowered their eyes or bowed their heads. Not a single person had been asked to show respect, yet an undeniable power commanded them all the same. The mobile staircase had just been locked in place when two officers came on board to escort Brigitte and Leroy off the plane first. Brigitte walked as if in a fog, every step down the walkway feeling heavy. The bright red lipstick on her lips was smudged, and her eyes stared straight ahead, empty. Right behind her came Gaspard Leroy with 4 officers walking beside him. Moments ago, he was a confident CEO. Now he was just a scared man, his face drained of color, in a wrinkled suit. On the runway, Burkina security officials politely but firmly took both Brigitte and Leroy into custody. No formal charges were announced on the spot, but the message was clear. Insulting the representative of a head of state is a grave offense that would be thoroughly investigated. By that afternoon, Horizon France Air's headquarters was in damage control mode. The airline issued a public apology.
We sincerely apologize for the incident aboard Horizon France Air Flight 872. Customer respect is our highest priority, and we are reviewing our training protocols.
Polished words, empty, tone-deaf, and far too late. Meanwhile, fellow passengers' videos of the incident spread like wildfire online. Clips showed Brigitte scowling at the quiet man in 2A, Gaspard's smug entrance into the cabin, and finally, the officer's salute and booming, "Mr. President," the #sign Respect Africa trended worldwide. He was in 2A, let that sink in, one outraged tweet read. Others demanded apologies and accountability, calling out Brigitte by name. What started as a small problem on the flight blew up into a worldwide scandal, a clear lesson about unfair judgment and respect. That evening, at a brief press gathering in Ouagadougou, a French reporter managed to ask,
Monsieur le Président, do you intend to press charges?
Ibrahim gave a small, thoughtful smile.
I don't want them punished.
He replied softly.
I want them to learn how to see people not through prejudice, but through human eyes.
His words were simple, but they carried tremendous weight. No one asked another question. The next morning, President Traoré went about his duties as usual. He met with his cabinet, reviewed development plans, and even answered a few questions from university students, never once mentioning the previous day's flight. He simply sipped his morning coffee, black, no sugar, and carried on as if nothing had happened. By week's end, Brigitte Lemaitre was suspended. Gaspard Leroy's flagship mining deal in Burkina Faso had evaporated, and Horizon France Air scrambled to announce a new Diversity and Respect program. But none of these gestures were born of fear. They came because those involved had finally learned a lesson. The quiet dignity of someone confident in their own worth will always compel those who only think themselves superior to bow their heads. Thanks for watching. I wish you better life, foods, and money. Stay in the Big Wins family.